Well, I hope that such a low voice, which becomes almost like a sexy voice, is not going to make you sleep this afternoon. So I'll try to keep you awake. I know that you've been working hard, and I'll do my best. And I hope that my voice will anyway carry me through the talk. In this event, in this forum of curriculum in Brazil, mathematics curriculum, there are present a variety of perspectives to talk about the mathematics curriculum. In our colleague plenary talk yesterday, the question of which are the knowledges, the mathematical knowledges to bring in the future was mentioned. So perspective of curriculum that asks the question about the necessary mathematical knowledge that school programs need to bring to the new generations is a particular perspective to think about, to understand and work in curriculum. However, that's not the only possible perspective. As you read in the first title of my talk, my perspective is more a perspective that tries to see mathematics curriculum from a social and political perspective, social, cultural and political perspective. And that is what I will be trying to bring to you, kind of an explanation of the kind of perspectives that I adopt, the ways in which I think about the mathematics curriculum, and which kind of studies and which kind of insights this kind of perspective brings, that in my point of view complement other perspectives that might focus more on the issue of the contents, on the issue of the organization, the didactical organization of contents and the ways in which teachers and students might work in the realm of the school to do what we call mathematics education, to fulfill certain social aims. I think that different perspectives of curriculum actually are not, in my point of view, competing or exclusive. I think that by illuminating different aspects of the work that we do with mathematics in schools, we're able to understand the bigness and complexity of the matter that we deal with as mathematics educators in schools, as teachers educators, and mathematics education researchers. So that's my perspective. I do not intend to deny other perspectives, but more to think how the way in which I understand curriculum presents complementary and also other information about the work that we do. So what I'm going to talk about, this perspective today, is human capitals, school mathematics curriculum, and the fabrication of a neoliberal homos economicus. So apparently, this doesn't say much about mathematics, except that the word here is here, mathematics. And I'm going to explain why this word is in this larger configuration, where actually the word mathematics education acquires a particular meaning. First thing I'll have to say is actually that the work that I do is not just my work. Actually, I've been working for several years with a group of people from different places. Some my doctoral students from Denmark, from Sweden, Also, Latin American colleagues, students who are now my colleagues, and also other more senior people in Colombia and also in Brazil who have been my inspiration and my co-workers, as well as some other people in general education, curricular theory, as Tom Spockowitz, and people also who work in the history of education. And this is because, actually, I would dare to say that nobody's work is just an individual work. We're all the time thinking together with people the work that we do, but also particularly for me, it has been very important to draw in this interdisciplinarily from other general education, sociology, anthropology, cultural studies, in order to unpack what mathematics education may mean. So I would like to say that this is not just my work, it is me putting voice to a series of ideas that have grown together with these people. Now, within mathematics education research, what we may call the socio-political trends of study of research have been kind of on the air for a while. There have been a group of people in different countries and with different theoretical perspectives working on the political dimensions of mathematics education. Unfortunately, I cannot do the talk that I was going to do today in the roundtable, because there my idea was to give more an overview of these kinds of perspectives. So there are tendencies that you might know, like critical mathematics education, which has been led by different people, among others, and now almost Brazilian Ole Skogsmosen, originally from Denmark, and now living most of his life in Brazil, in Unesco, in Rio Claro. And that is kind of the trend from where I started. However, I do not say today that I do as such critical mathematics education. I think I've moved away from that. And the idea that I want to think about today and that I try to work with is the idea of the cultural politics of mathematics education. Now, what does it mean to say that one researches or understands mathematics education in relation to cultural politics? And I'm going to use this painting that you see here, that I suppose many of you recognize. That's the Guernica by Picasso. And Picasso was painting in the beginning of the 20th century sceneries of the war. And he was actually very irreverent with his paintings. He was kind of, the first time you see Picasso, you say, like, what is that, right? You start stranging things. Like, is this a person? Is this horse? Where is the leg of the horse? But it's mixed together. Is this what? What is that? And Picasso says the following about his work. I'm going to read it in English, but you might read it in Spanish if that helps you. The one in Spanish is on the top. You have to wake people up, and you're going to have it in Portuguese anyways. You have to wake people up. I suppose Picasso spoke quite strongly. To revolutionize the way of identifying things. You've got to create images they won't accept. Make the foam at the mouth. force them to understand that they're living in a pretty queer world. A world that's not reassuring. A world that's not what they think it is. And somehow, in the paintings of Picasso, if we think about this, he was trying to make people see the world in a different way. However, all these paintings, and he himself, he had to struggle, because at the time he started painting and doing his cubism, he actually had to struggle with the norms and the rules of what it meant to be proper painting. I'm not going to keep on talking about painting. However, my point is that when we are in culture, and culture is all of the human world, we're always negotiating values, ways of seeing, and ways of understanding the world, right? And this, all of us would do. We would do that in our classroom where we're talking about, for example, social mathematical norms. What is it that's valid here in this classroom, in the culture of my classroom, to as valid mathematical ways of speaking or not? But also when we are in general in culture, in relation to mathematics, we're negotiating all the time. What is that what we take as mathematics? Why? What is what we take as mathematics education, and why? So my point of view is that if mathematics education is a very important part in our society, plays a very important role in our current societies, and we all would like to think that it is the case. That's why we're doing what we're doing, right? Then we could be aware of the constant fight to define what's valid and what's legitimate in any level of the work that we do in the classroom, with our colleagues, with colleagues from other areas, in the Ministry of Education, in a variety of places in society. Power struggles about what counts as valid in mathematics are being played out constantly. So that's one thing. I prefer not necessarily to concentrate on the work of teachers and students. There are many colleagues who do this. I like to take the lens out and take a broader perspective to see how in societies, in Western societies, through history, there have been negotiations that constitute the meanings that we give in any time and space to what's mathematics education. So that's what I call the cultural politics of mathematics education. That's the space in which I'm moving, and that's the space from which I'm talking about curriculum. When working in that landscape, there are colleagues who are inspiration, but particularly I feel they're inspired by the work of philosophers who have tried to think cultural politics for many other cultural objects of modern societies. I am very fond of Michel Foucault, among others. And what I try to do is to study Foucault and think how his thinking he mentioned almost never the word mathematics, and certainly almost never mathematics education. Foucault was not interested about the problems that I am interested in. By the way, none of the people, or most of the people that we read and take as theoreticians for the work that we do, we're interested with the problems we are interested in. Yeah? Piaget was interested in the cognitive development of the child. He was not interested directly, that's not necessarily true, because he was very much collaborated with mathematicians of his time. But he was not devising a pedagogy of mathematics. We take those ideas and we rethink our problems with the ideas of all the kinds of people that we want to think our mathematics educational problems. And in particular, when we talk about cultural politics and the study of the cultural politics of mathematics education, some of Foucault's strategies of analysis are, for me, very useful in the sense that they push me to think what is it that is mathematics education. And here there is a quotation I like very much from a person, Martin Starr, who's trying to kind of explain what he sees as the function of the kind of study that's called genealogy that Foucault presents. And he says this: genealogy is a kind of study that historicizes, but that does this kind of thing. Tell me the story when a genealogy is a kind of study that does this. It's a story that tells a story of the genesis of myself and my understanding in such way that when I hear to you telling me that story, I don't want to be the way I thought I had to be. And when I hear what you say, when you talk about this story, I realize that this isn't necessary. That is a kind of a bit complicated sentence, right? What I think it's saying is, when you read a study of this type, you realize two things. One is that it has something to do with you. That's why it's an understanding of the self, of the way in which I think, in the way in the beliefs that I have, what makes me. But when I hear this story, I start seeing that, oh gosh, what I thought was normal, what I thought was what I had to be, is not only as I thought it could be, but also that I see a very important thing, and it is that thus the ways in which we think we should be are not compulsory, are not necessary. They are always contingent. They're always relational and thus possible to change. So somehow for me, this is saying in a very complicated way what Picasso was saying here. Picasso was telling us a story in painting of a different possibility to resemble painting, to resemble a view. And if you read a bit and have seen some of the exhibitions of paintings of Picasso, and some of those that are commented, there is this whole struggle to kind of twist the view so that people do what? Like, oh yeah, oh yeah, why not? That could be a woman, or this could be a bull, just that it is not the way I am used to see it. And therefore, I can start conceiving of an alternative. And this conception of an alternative is what I think is one of the things that moves me to do the studies of the cultural politics of mathematics education. Since I started researching in mathematics education, one of my searches was, or has been, the issue of power. How is it that mathematics education connects to power? how is it that mathematics education is political? Yeah. And some of you might have seen my previous work. When I started working on this, I talked a lot about democracy, for example, citizenship. Now the stage in my work where I am is I'm trying to think the political in relation to subjectivity and the governing of subjectivities through mathematics education. What does that mean? Okay. One might think that some decades ago, in many national curricula in mathematics, there was stated sentences that one of the purposes of mathematics education had to do with the promotion of citizenship and democracy. That was mainly the decade of the 90s. And some of us who have been, who are old enough and have been on the ground long enough, might have noticed that in the recent decades, those words have almost disappeared from the national formulations of curriculum. And instead, other words have appeared. Words like entrepreneurship, words like competitiveness, now recently sustainability. So mathematics education is actually trying to do some particular types of people with and through the learning of mathematics. And it is in this that the view of education building subjectivity, that is, understandings of who we are as beings, as humans, as historical beings, with mathematics, whatever the mathematics means in different times. This is a matter of power. Because it is here where we are creating notions of who people are that are extremely important in how we connect to others and connect to the world and also to work. So the work of Thomas Pockwitz, who's a professor of curriculum studies in the United States, has helped me quite a lot to understand how to do this in mathematics education. And in this quite old paper with Brennan, they say that part of thinking of education as making people is try to understand which are the rationalities, which are the ways of thinking that are immersed in education through which we are governing and conducting, creating types of people, types of human beings. So the study of education in that type, in that spirit, in that shape, would place the objects constituted by the knowledge of schooling into historically formed patterns and power relationships. For mathematics, that would mean to try to understand mathematics education practices and the whole organization of mathematics and the curriculum as historically formed patterns and power relations. So for me, this is inviting me to put the curricula and our practices in a historical background, to understand what they're doing, and to understand them not only as a result of themselves, or as a result of distinct forces that actually have an intention of creating something out of the mathematical education of people. So epistemology, that way of approaching the study of that, provides a context in which to consider the rules and standards by which knowledge about the world and the self is formed. Any of us, the sense that we have of ourselves is always created in relation to what are the norms and the ways of thinking of our time. This is what this sentence means. Epistemology also provides the means to investigate distinctions and categories that organize perceptions, ways of responding to the world, and the conceptions of self. So in mathematics, this would mean which are the distinctions and categories, how is it the concepts we use generate forms of acting and responding to the world. This means that the concepts that we have, the theories that we use, organize through the way we see through and we see the world. They're not innocent. They're making us see the world in particular ways. Concurrently, social epistemology, and that is what he's talking about, social epistemology is a way of studying education, the cultural politics of education. Locates the objects constituted by the knowledge of schooling as historical practices through which power relations can be understood. Statements and words are not signs or signifiers that refer to unfixed things, but social practices that generate action and participation. And I think that this is very important for me because at the time that we start playing with this idea, the list of contents that might organize syllabi and curricula are not just concepts, are techniques to regulate what is it that children should know and be and become and learn to do through the way in which we do it in schooling. So we move the focus from the contents as knowledge that has to be transmitted towards knowledge as forms of doing and understanding the world. And by the way, one of my students, my doctoral students, who's called Melissa Andrade, she will defend her thesis soon, has been doing a study of this type with relation to school geometry. And that is I won't refer a lot to her work today, but that is a very good example of how she has taken this kind of idea and put it in practice for her to think what the school geometry curriculum does in the way in which we learn to be in relation to space, in terms of our subjectivity. So somehow, what I've been saying is that we're always in culture, we're learning to see the world through categories and distinctions. Yeah? I am Paola, you are Camille, and I'm taller than you, my hair is darker, my eyes are green, you're brown, your hair is blonde, but there is a man and a woman, they're different categories, and here we're Brazilian, and then we are probably fast developing country, although recently that goes kind of not so well. But there are developed countries, and in the developed countries there are people who have mathematics, whose mathematical thinking comes and helps us to see in these categories. This is, by the way, the artwork of Michael Mapes that does this kind of dissecting portraits. But you see, seeing, can you recognize in your life and in your way of understanding that actually we're all the time thinking in distinctions? This is part of being modern, is to start to think about particular kinds of distinctions. Differentiations, but also orderings. This is kind of put embedded, almost invisible in the way in which we have learned to be modern, even if we are Western Brazilian modern, and not necessarily, for example, French modern. the Western culture of modernity has spread this as a particular way of understanding humans and understanding the world. So this is another very typical image, by the way, the same artist, where we dissect. Probably you don't see this, and I'm afraid of messing up the presentation if I zoom in, but we can have the totality, and we have the tendency. Science taught us through the centuries to pay attention also to the parts, to dissect the mathesis as one of the key elements of science was to dissect and differentiate. And this might be more familiar to all of us. This is in Sweden, the work of Carl Linnaeus, who was the great botanist of the taxonomies of plants, which actually helped thinking about the species, the different kinds of classifications of all organisms. We do this everywhere, every time. We do it also when we play. We teach our children to do the same when we're giving them this at the age of almost less than 1, right? And those who have had children, my children have had plenty of this, where you have to learn circle, fits, does not fit, triangle. So very innocently in our world, we learn to have a gaze, a view that does those classifications and organizations. And so we do it in mathematics very explicitly, right? And this translates to all kinds of classifications and organizations. Here is one of another type, peace studies. Another kind of measurement that places an ordering from most performance to lower performance of different kinds of countries. And from there come sentences like this: nurturing excellence in mathematics, reading, or science in all our 3 domains is crucial for a country's development, as these students will become the vanguard of a competitive, knowledge-based global economy. This is pretty much connected to the kind of classification that this type of ordering and ranking is doing in the measurement of mathematical competence and math and readings and reading and science and some other stuff. And then I have to come back here to Foucault to think about this. When we establish a considered classification, when we say that a cat and a dog resemble each other less than 2 greyhounds do, even if both are tame or bound, even if both are frenzied, even if both have just broken the water pitcher, what is the ground on which we're able to establish the validity of this classification with complete certainty? On what table, according to what grid of identities, similitudes, analogies, have we become accustomed to sort out so many different and similar things? What's this coherence, which, as is immediately apparent, is neither determined by an a priori and necessary concatenation, nor imposed on us by immediately perceptible contents? What I want to say with this is that a classification like this has some rules for classification, the same as this classification and any other classification. The question in these cultural studies is, Why did we end classifying things in such a way that it has become natural for us? So the exercise of the cultural politics of mathematics education would invite us to think on how is it that we think the classifications that we operate in mathematics to become natural, on the grounds of knowledge, on the grounds of ability, on the grounds of what of the students, and make them visible and make us think, put our eye on the reasons in historical terms for those classifications. And it is in this sense that these kinds of studies for me become problematizing, become, as Picasso was saying, making us foam through the mouth, because suddenly what we thought was what had to be appears distinct, appears unfamiliar, appears rare, and not normal or not common sense. That was a long explanation, but I think that I tried to do my best not to use very sophisticated terms and force myself really to say what I mean when I'm thinking in this way. To try and make accessible to you how is it that I'm thinking about this. You might agree or not, but at least I'm trying to make you follow how is it that I'm thinking so that you can judge whether you agree or not with me later on. I hope you're still with me. So, from this perspective, the questions to the math curriculum start being the following. Which subjectivities does the math curriculum fabricate? Which kind of people does the mathematics education want to construct? Which are the technologies on which the mathematics curriculum operates those types of people? In which direction the curriculum governs both individuals and population? Because the curriculum acts at certain level in our classrooms, at the level of people, individuals. But it also drives a whole country. It also works at a higher level of a whole population. And nowadays, with, for example, the OECD studies, international comparative studies, and recommendations that come out of that from about education, we're governing even at the global level. The population at the global level. So these are, and in which, and especially in which historical configuration does such governing take place? Because it doesn't take very long to know that education that we have today was not the same that we had 50 years ago, and is not the same as the one that we had 100 years ago. There are continuities and there are differences. But we tend to say that the history of the mathematics curriculum is a succession from not so good ideas, sometimes to better ideas, sometimes the ideas come back, but it's a natural evolution. What I'm trying to say is to move away from that idea that there is a natural evolution of the curriculum that responds to social necessities, to say that there are actually particular ways of thinking about mathematics and what they want and what the mathematics education does to people, and that there are alternatives. There are always alternatives. That is my point, and that is a very political point. Now, I think that it was this morning, Alexandrina in her talk was talking about Foucault, Deleuze, and rhizomes, very many different notions of that kind of theoretical landscape. The way in which I see this is that when I'm doing an investigation, I have a problem that I want to to problematize. I have something that bothers me that I want to defamiliarize. And as I start working, the work becomes kind of like a network work. The work becomes like a rhizome in the sense that you go sometimes into some, you go like tracing as a detective, doing a detective tracing, almost working like Agatha Christie would work when sorting out a crime. You strike the point, and then you say, oh, but why this? Then you go to another point, and then this leads you a trace, but then you go to another point, but then you might go back, and then there is no linearity, and there is no particular path, rigorous path, no. There is a rigorous path, rigorosity. There is not a one single path in going around that problematization. And that's why I like to kind of almost use these, although these are not so good, these are all too organized for my taste. But somehow I want to represent that you move in different directions with sorting out these. Now, some years ago, I found this paper, Lin and Meisenberg, National IQs Calculated and Validated for 108 Nations, in the journal Intelligence, which is a journal that discusses the notion of intelligence, mainly kind of psychological work being published here. And it's well-recognized. These two persons have been doing a series of studies on IQs, intellectual quotients. And they argue that they're able now to find what one could call an IQ of a nation. Quociente intelectual da nação. What do you think about that? Who? Well, ótimo. So they have been doing a series of studies, statistical studies, where they end up conflating, in my point of view, IQ or not. Let's be fair first. Hold on the grounds of the systematic big data and similar results that there have appeared in the world as a result of several international comparative assessments of school performance, what they put under this school achievement, educational attainment. They take the results of all these studies, PISA studies, TIM studies, and also some of the other studies that different organizations make. They aggregate them and they say there's so many similarities. They do a very rigorous statistical process and they say, look, the results are actually very consistent. Since educational attainment is, and what they're measuring is a very important measurement, and they do it systematically and solidly, we could actually take this aggregated measurement of all these diverse measurements and actually take it as a measurement of IQ. So, the results of PISA for Brazil, aggregated through time, through the calculation that these persons have been doing, would be the intellectual quotient for Brazil. And they say the high correlation between IQ and EA shows that these two measures are not merely two otherwise unrelated development indicators, It rather shows that intelligence tests and scholastic achievement tests measure the same or nearly the same construct. To the extent that educational attainment is important for a country's economic or cultural destiny, IQ is important as well. We suggest that both can be used interchangeably as measurements of human capital. And they summarize their results with this table, which is actually very interesting. So here they have the IQ of nations and aggregated by regions, and different, where are they? The standard deviation with IQ, or actual educational achievement and performance, and the difference in each region. Okay. Who are the most intelligent? You can read tables. Yeah? And of course, it doesn't take a second to know which is the region that has less national intelligence. Africa, of course. And look, us Latin Americans, we're just above the average. But we all Latin Americans, me, I'm from Colombia originally, right? We're more or less like, but this is what they say, which of course is very problematic. But my point is not that this is problematic. The point is with which kind of discourses this type of thinking about educational achievement, intelligence, and human capital is connected. Well, here they say that, of course, studying this is very important because human capital will help us, or these measurements will help us predict national differences in a variety of outcomes like societal development, rate of democratization, population health, productivity, gross domestic product. And then I start looking at what is OECD and PISA studies saying, actually. And their classification, in my point of view, is discursively concurrent with these kinds of statements. When we say that, when PISA 2012 argues for the importance of foundational skills in mathematics, they say the following: they have a major impact on individuals' life chances, and please notice the similarities between what they're saying. Poor mathematics skills severely limit people's access to better paying and more rewarding jobs. At the aggregated level, inequality in the distribution of mathematics skills across populations is closely related to how wealth is shared within nations. So you see, these courses, at least from my point of view, my analysis, are actually very much connected. I mean, the discourse of Leon Meisenberg, and something like this. Beyond that, the survey PISA shows that people with strong skills in mathematics are also more likely to volunteer, to see themselves as actors in rather than as objects of political processes, and are even more likely to trust others. Fairness, integrity, and inclusiveness in public policy does also hinge on the skills of citizens. And when I get here, you see, okay, we're attributing to mathematical skills we're putting together lots of economic promises, but also moral qualities. You see, you're fantastic because you're making all your students more nice, collaborative, good people. I mean, I'm sorry, but hold on a moment. I think that goes a bit too far. But the point is not that whether I like it or not. The point is to notice which kind of connections are being made. Can you see? And this is PISA. And even though they translate, that the students who are good at mathematics are more likely to trust others. I don't know if that holds, but it is a way of thinking that's being repeated and repeated again. And of course, all those skills provide the vital glue for resilient communities, well-functioning societies, strengthening inclusiveness, tolerance, trust, ethics, responsibility, environmental awareness, collaboration, and effective democratic processes. So do you see the move between mathematical skills and then a series of moral attributes given to people in relation to this? But these kind of voices are not only the voices of OECD, that's promoting a whole study of peace and a particular way of understanding mathematics, which I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, it is that it is particular way. That's my point. And this is also what we in mathematics education say. Access to learning mathematics is a human right in itself, since mathematics is seen as a cultural product of purposeful human activity. Or, studying mathematics will bring associated benefits, personal, social, political, for all. So somehow we're making connections that in a discursive field, all these kinds of assertions that are done, apparently emitted by independent people, resonate and have an effect of creating this social epistemology, these kinds of categories and ways of looking that organize and orient the way in which we're thinking about mathematics education. And I'm not saying that then we should not teach mathematics or that it's bad or that, no. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm making you notice what is it, what these statements, what they connect with, and which are the qualities that they are attributing to the processes, in which direction they're bringing us. I'm sorry, I have to do the technical stuff. Okay, so the question was, how do we unpack this? In which grids of historical events do we understand that this is the case that we have now? This is the kind of discourses, the kinds of ways of thinking about mathematics in education that we have internationally. And I'm sure, I have not studied Brazil, but I'm sure that there will be dissonances and similarities to this. I'm sure that this is not unfamiliar to you. We have been studying in Colombia how this process has been taking place, in Denmark, also in Chile. And actually, with those studies, the question that emerges is, all those apparent similarities that we know, we recognize, and that for us have become actually a necessary way of arguing. Like, who would say that any of you should not teach the all best possible mathematics so that Brazil can improve in the best possible ways the results in PISA? Everybody wants to do good, right? The point is, how is it? Let's for a minute try to strange this and think that there might be other options and that this is contingent, and try to see which kind of historical processes some of these ideas have emerged and which are the connections that they have. So the first thing we have to say is the whole idea of increasingly during the 20th century up to our days, the idea that mathematics and mathematics education should be known and is connected to the economic and social progress of nations. I think that nowadays we would say, oh yeah, well, of course, if we can measure, if PISA in Brazil is an indicator of human capital, then Brazil, where is it? Brazil is doing good, but not as good as the developed countries. If we go historically, actually, at the end of the 19th century, the whole debate was, well, at the end of the 19th century, some of you have been studying the history of Brazil and the history of mathematics education in Brazil. The world looked like very, very different. First of all, there might not have been a universal state-regulated system of education. And at that time, the priority of the humanities over what was considered at that time the technical knowledges, sciences, the emerging sciences, the empirical sciences, technological knowledge at that time, and certainly mathematics, those areas of knowledge were considered as practical of a technical nature, and thus of a second rank in relation to the humanities, the letters, the classical studies, for the purpose of forming the mind of the virtuous citizen. And here we have to bring into consideration the whole historical process of the making of nations before the 19th century, but also of the consolidation of nation states in many parts of the world, among others here in Latin America. And at one point, actually, I would say that tension got resolved in favor of mathematics and science as we have today, and I'll come back to that. But also at that time, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a great advance in the educational sciences. And there started being more evident this issue that any kind of social problem should become the problem of education, a problem to be solved by education. Do you know that? Do you recognize that kind of tendency? Crisis financiera, financial crisis in the world. And then what happens? Well, we need financial education so that people will not make again a new financial crisis. Any kind of problem has to be processed through education to be brought to people. And educational sciences are the ones to study how to do this in a scientific manner. Because also in the change from the 19th to the 20th century, the scientificization of society became a very powerful way of governing and seeing and understanding ourselves. Of course, educational science had to deliver and to construct diverse or devised curricula and pedagogical techniques for achieving educational aims. And within that, there started expanding and being created pedagogical programs in mathematics and expanding them at larger scales. But the in-between wars, at least in Europe, was for many studios of the history of education kind of a period of stagnation. Not very many things happened. And it is the post Second World War, that came with a technological optimism, where actually many of the technologies of war that were very effective to do a very good Second World War for the Allies, actually many of those technologies started to be, the way in which those scientific technologies work for war started to be taken as a model to be translated and applied to many other areas of life for the improvement of life. For example, there are many technologies of war that were created when there was no more war. Those technologies had to be used, for example, in the creation of pesticides, the creation of also fertilizers for agricultural production. So far, so good. Of course, we know that later on we discovered how there were lots of unforeseen consequences of those technologies. But the idea was clear. We needed to emulate the way in which scientists worked together at that time to bring it, to really push progress and push development into all areas of society, and among those, education. And at that time also, it became very evident that the whole issue of scientific development and technological development was also a matter of economy. Because in the post-war war, the whole issue was how to, a big issue is how to reconstruct nations and how to do it building up economy, building up a material or rebuilding material base. And here we find that from the very, very beginning of the new maths, the proposal of the modern mathematics and the new maths, the support of OECD and UNESCO to the Royal Mont Seminar, and the development of mathematics, the new technologies, the new modern technologies of mathematics were super important. I'm not saying that these people were bad or that they had bad intentions. What I'm pointing to is that one possible way of reading the expansion of national science-based mathematics curricula that started happening at that time, in the 50s, later on in the 60s, strongly in different countries, have already there a connection, strong connection with an economic interest. And of course, the whole idea of the making of scientific, mathematical literate citizens, which was very evident in the Cold War and the whole fight between East and West, and the Americans beating the Russians with the race to the moon and the Sputnik shock. All that scenario and that way of thinking got inserted in the ways in which differently in different countries mathematics, education, technologies of the curriculum were taught. That's my point. Then there starts a very interesting move, and it is how mathematics and mathematics achievement started being connected with global economic competition. And in the 60s, particularly in the United States, the whole issue of who is benefiting from education, which it was not a very kind of democratic profiting of education. There was a lot, and still there is, a lot of differentiation of who has access to which kind of quality of education in the United States. Is an issue still today of large differentiation, and it is an important debate. At that time, there was a very important sociologist, mathematician that actually did a mathematical sociology, Coleman, together with a group of people, produced a report that was to to say, answer to this question. If we study who comes into the American educational system, and at the end, which benefits these people get, how do we understand that? And this person actually created a very important educational technology, which is, I think, one of the bases for some of the things that we have, the technologies that we have now. And he invented an input-output model of education. And it was like this. At this time of the Coleman report, there was already in the United States lots of tests of educational attainment in school subjects, among those mathematics. The input-output model, the greatness of this report and of this person was to connect individual individual socioeconomic status measured in a variety of variables. That is, what the student brings with him or herself to school. You know that socioeconomic status still today in many studies is measured by, for example, indicators like you go to ask the children, are there books in your house? How many books are there in your house? Do you have which kind of appliances? What is the educational level of your parents? To measure kind of where is where this student is placed in a kind of differentiation of access to different series of economic, material, and intellectual resources. The models of Coleman that also represented a big development in sociology at that time connected that individual characteristic to school output as measured in tests of school achievement. So the creation of this person was actually what comes in, what do you bring in, and we connected straight through the way in which the data was analyzed to what goes out, the performance in school tests, among others in mathematics. So that is the input-output model. Before that time, that was not possible to think. So you see, this, for me, that one of the reasons that I've got so enthusiastic about this is because the way in which we think about PISA today, the way in which, for example, we construct many of these studies, make very simply this association between what the student brings and what is the result in achievement. But actually, this is an historical construction. This emerged at a particular time. Before that, people did not think about this problem of educational opportunity in this way. And since then, new refinements have actually started operating. Many different associations at that time and groups started working in similar kinds of studies. And you see, then through the years, it became to be possible the connection between individual school performance in school subjects and individual capacity or the prosperity or socioeconomic status of individuals, then aggregated socioeconomic status or possibilities of groups, of countries, and of nations. So you see, I think that for me, understanding what these guys I was presenting at the beginning and the studies of PISA are talking about, we need to see how is it that it was possible to associate strongly school performance in mathematics with the whole, with the idea of prosperity prosperity and economic wealth of different groups of people. Now, I've been saying, if we think this landscape in our current situation, right now, we're living a particular kind of society now. Some have called it a post-political society, and when I hear post-political, there's nothing that's post-political, everything is political. What they refer to this term is the tendency nowadays, or actually not nowadays, now it's very evident, it's not hidden, but from some decades, that the state has taken not necessarily the defense of the public interest as a way of governing, but the defense of private interest and the interest of the capital. And a very clear example of this, which has different manifestations in different countries, is Trump. Right? An entrepreneur, a businessman, is the president of the United States. And I don't need to comment about the current Brazilian situation. You can think yourselves about how you see this. But nowadays, we're thinking a lot about individual school performance and associating it with a word. Now we're not talking about any more skills, we're talking about competence. And competence, the whole language of competence, is a very strong, has historically a very strong association to an idea of education for work. So performance and competence are being made equivalent. But also mathematical competence nowadays comes together with other ideas. Entrepreneurship and competitiveness. Yeah. So the ways, if you examine and you study the wordings of policies, national policies, international policy agencies, even as Marcio was talking in his roundtable about the textbooks, in very different instances where mathematics education is being done, even in classrooms, in problems, there are these words that appear with very particular meanings. And at the end, somehow, the gaining of mathematical competence or mathematical knowledge or mathematical skills, and then here the terms might be differentiated or not, represent a value for the individual. Yeah? My students, doctoral students from Chile, particularly Alex Montesino, has been studying how mathematics in Chile has become, and more than ever, the kind of the value that you have to be able to do well in any other kind of field of studies around the world. In Chile, to enter different kinds of studies. I just lost my track, sorry. So the mathematical value of the individual becomes an exchange value and is a measurement at the end of the person's human capital. Even nowadays, we might have a whole race and competition among each other who goes to the most prestigious school of mathematics because that will secure me a job. On a completely different, though related note, if you had time to follow the discussions about the transfer of Neymar to the Parisian football team, right? This morning I heard the following reasoning. It's an unimaginable amount of money. You agree with me, right? the football team says, it's not that quantity of money, it doesn't matter. For us, he is what will bring more money and more value to the team. At that time, Neymar is not anymore the nice Brazilian guy who plays football like this. It's not the quality of football. It's just the matter of the business of the value of Neymar. The focus between Neymar as a football player got displaced to the focus of him as a merchandise that produces value. And I would say that it would be possible to hear in many of the discourses that we have today about our dear mathematics education a similar kind of reason. Again, I'm not saying that it's bad or good. I'm saying that it is a particular way of thinking of what's of value of mathematics now, and why is it that we're educating mathematically people. So now to finish, because I've had you here for a long time. The whole issue is that when we learn to do these classifications and organizations that we talked about at the beginning, and when we make them apply always to classify, in mathematics education, we are learning to do and classify our students. We classify them about how much they did and how well they performed in the test, how well they sorted out the problem, or this or that. And all these differentiations generate combined mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion. There are some to which we are, in our practice, giving and granting more value, and some that we're devalorizing, also with the effect in all of us, also as teachers and in students themselves, as being valorized with value or not. Because the similar logic applies for us university professors or for you as teachers, right? We also have an exchange value. As better or worse mathematics educators, more recognized, more grants for teachers, better results of the students, whatever. There are different of these systems all the time operating. And that, of course, is productive. That makes many things possible. But it makes also many exclusions possible as well. And most of the times, we take them for granted. We take them as necessary. There is a colleague of mine, Alexandre Pais, who has been writing for some time an economic analysis of mathematics education. And he is very radical, much more radical than what I could think I am. And he would say, the reason why being good at mathematics has value is because the value that some get is at the expense of the failure of many. So for one person to be brilliant mathematically and to be good and have acquire all those capacities and abilities and performance and competence that we would like children to acquire mathematically, we almost have to operate we have to dequalify many, because otherwise that one would not have value. Do you see how the relationship goes? And it is here when in our late or in this type of capitalist societies, in this kind of economic organization that we're living nowadays, for me, that is not something that is just the context of mathematics education. That rationality enters and configurates the everyday in the way in which we work, and the very same way in which we conceive of the possible relations and the possible meanings of mathematical competence, and of the kinds of knowledge and of the kinds of relationships that we are constructing. So it is there where nowadays I really strongly think that if we do not pay attention and denaturalize what we're doing, we are reducing, or we run the very serious risk of reducing the meaning of mathematics education to education for work. And with that, we end up constructing not a human being anymore, but a homus economicus. It is not a homus, it's not a thinking person, it's not a rational being, it is an economic exchange being. And that economization of relationships is making what this person, Wayne Brown, is arguing that long time ago in this configuration, we stopped being human beings to be human capitals. That's what my title of the talk. Now, if that is the case, I think that one of the things that comes out of the studies of the cultural politics of mathematics education is the question of which are the ethical and political commitments of math educators. And it is the question I've been asking all the time. Are we aware and do we know in which directions we're governing and being governed? Because what we're doing is not innocent. We're always, the very same meaning of education is that you're directing people, guiding into a particular direction. So which one is that? So and at the same time, where are the cracks? Where are the options for finding alternatives? Because even though there could be that possibility of the exchange, of the assigning an economic exchange value to the acquisition of mathematical competence, that is not a necessary condition. It is just contingent to the time in which we are. So which other options could we have? And I take this really very seriously when my 14-year-old daughter comes and asks me, "Oh my, what am I going to do all these math exercises for?" What am I going to say? And I know you face this problem as parents, as teachers, as grandparents, because of its use. What will you mean? Because learning mathematics gives you something that society values, and it is also abstract thinking, which would be a different answer from, because you're going to use these and you're going to apply it when you do any kind of work. Look, if you go to the supermarket, you need to do calculations, which is like a narrative we have run on for a long time. I really feel that narrative is being short nowadays. Is it because with mathematics you will become able to do technology, and there is where the jobs are in the future? Or is it because really it is cultural creation of humanity that you need to know if you think that you are an educated person? Or is it a philosophical reason? It is because it is the possibility of thinking in a particular ways of ideas that are of abstract nature. So which are the reasons that we ourselves are adhering to, and which are the cracks for those reasons that we can find in the system? What I find kind of unacceptable is that probably we are only operating comfortably as educators, having the responsibility that we have, thinking that what we're given and what we're told is the way in which we have to be. So I hope that by showing and sharing with you some of this kind of research, we start asking those kinds of questions. What is it that we're doing? Do I need to be the mathematics teachers that I thought I had to be? Or could I be otherwise? Thank you very much.